is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue talking about anime series and using them in your BESM game. I've been talking about a lot of different anime series and how to break them down and some easy information for adapting them into your BESM game. Just a little bit of hints that you could when doing so. This week, I'm finally starting with the current season of Fall 2016, talking to you about some anime from that, and we're continuing on our back ways, going back in 2015, going back in time with series from there. So eventually, probably we'll get to a point in time where we have talked about all the series, but until then, let's continue. So I have two more from this season. I have Brave Witches, and of course I have Drifters. Let's talk about Brave Witches to begin with, because Brave Witches is actually a technical spin-off of the Strike Witches series, which has been a series of anime, light novels, and of course manga. Now this is set in an alternate world where it's a kind of World War II era where these aliens called the Neuroi have invaded and conventional weapons have no effect on them. People are losing. They find out that these young girls that have magical powers known as witches can actually fight against them, and they give them these kind of sort of mixture of mechanical and magical tools called striker units that they can then use to fly and fight against the Neuroi. And so it's all about the adventures of these characters fighting against the Neuroi. Each of these series, including Brave Witches, focuses on a single girl and her adventures with whatever unit that she's a member of, going against the Neuroi, kind of fighting against them, trying to overcome them, trying to protect the world and prevent them from continuing their spread and destruction that they've already done. So the genre is, of course, military. It's a military anime because it's all about that they're in military units, they're in these working with the military, that they support them, that they kind of give them, you know, as much support as possible. So it's got a very militaristic feel to it. It's got science fiction, really. Yes, it's set in the World War II past, but they have kind of technology which seems very unusual to us, and they're fighting against, of course, like hyper-technological aliens that are battling against them. So yes, it has a very good science fiction feel to this. But it's also magical girl. They're witches. They have magical powers. They sort of have little transformations when they gain their animal ears and tails. It's kind of unusual, but it is. I rate this one a 4. It is a good series, I think, but there's very unusual things about it and some of the stylized choices that they choose, which make it a little more unique and maybe kind of a harder pill for most people to swallow too. And I can definitely understand where that comes from. So when you're using it in your BESM game, I would recommend 400 points. You're going to make your people members of a striker unit, a unit of witches. Whether it would be one that's already established, like the 501, 502, or one that you're coming up with yourself, is up to you. And you're positioning somewhere in the world to fight against the Neuroi, to try to keep back the tide of them, perhaps try to liberate an area of them, as it was seen in some of the animes could happen. But it's up to you how well you want to push this forward. And of course, your players might not be the only characters on the unit. You could have a bunch of NPCs to sort of fill it out, but they would be a core point of it. That would be a huge section of what's going on in that unit. Of course, it's up to you to determine how much the missions are very important or mild. You could have just fighting against the Neuroi missions, dealing with stuff that's going on with them, or you could have ones that they're trying to overcome and learn things in order to sort of push the point of clearing out an area of the Neuroi. Now, it's up to your players how they want to choose their country of origin, whether they want to be in something like the peaceful Fuso, which is effectively Japan, which hasn't been affected by the Neuroi really, or one of the countries that's effectively been conquered by it, like their version of Russia, where there are very few people left in it, if any. Up to you completely, and of course your players would choose whatever animal traits they want from the ears and tails they'll get when they're using their magic. Now let's talk about Drifters. So Drifters focuses mainly around a warrior named Shinazu, who was in the Battle of Sekigahara in Japan. He critically wounds the enemy officer, but in turn he is mortally wounded himself. Trying to wander back home in a kind of haze, he finds himself in this strange hallway of doors with a bespectacled man at the sort of in the center of it at a desk. He's kind of confused as a bespectacled man sends him through another one of these doorways, and he finds himself in this strange fantasy world where there's magic, elves, dwarves, halflings, in amongst the humans. He eventually sort of finds out that he's part of a group called Drifters that are being summoned to this world in order to protect them from another group called the Ends. The Drifters and the Ends are both made up of historical figures that have died in various ways, and upon their deaths are transported here. Drifters retain all of their sense of self that they had from the old world, and therefore can be sort of thought to be able to unite and be able to fight against the Ends. Ends lose all their sense of humanity, and in turn for it gain special powers that they have then. So they effectively become killing machines, which are all about murdering all of humanity. The other races are fine. And in turn, though, they become very powerful. So it's effectively the Ends are attempting to conquer this world, and purge humanity. And it's up to the Drifters to then fight against them. And they have their own techniques of doing so and trying to unite people that are very interesting. It's a very great series that I would recommend highly. It's, of course, action. It's action-packed. There's battles, kind of fighting it out. There are warriors through and through. Like, all the Drifters at the Ends are warriors, to say the least. It's science fantasy. It's not quite a fantasy and it's not quite a science fiction because they are being transported mysterious means to this other world, but they do have this level of technology to them. There are those that are trying to develop things like gunpowder, those that use guns, someone that has a carrier ship that came with him when the ship was going to be sunk, another that came with his plane. So there is this sort of like science fantasy level to it. And of course, I'd call it historical to a degree. They're historical figures and act a lot of the ways that their historical figures did upon their deathbeds. And it kind of has this historical connotations to it, an interesting kind of idea, because there have been Drifters and Ends that have showed up in previous generations. It's just seemingly that this generation is one of the worst for the Ends and one of the most powerful for the Drifters. So you see the effects of previous Drifters that have existed there and things that have gone on in this world because of it. And it's very interesting because it reflects our own historical nature. Now, as I said, this is one of my favorites from the new season. I rate it a 5. I highly recommend it. It was originally done as a manga by the same guy who does Hellsing, and he's still doing it now, and I recommend it for all. Now, if you're using it in a BESM game, I recommend 400 points. These are the elites of the elites, the top-end warriors, or they have things with them that make up for them. Like, maybe you're just an average dude, but you got an aircraft carrier. Maybe you're a pretty half-decent dude, and you've got a plane. Maybe you're a super elite warrior from the, Warring States or era of Japan that battles things out. Your players will choose their historical figure and make a group of Drifters. Whether they're involved with other Drifters or not is completely up to you how you want to build the storyline. And then they're going to be thrown into this world, whether you do that sort of piecemeal, having early sessions with certain characters to introduce them to world and then get them together as a group, or sort of assume that something's happened and then are together as a group. It's completely up to you. And they're going to deal with the Ends, and how they're going to deal with the Ends is completely up to them. They could follow something similar to what happens in the anime, trying to, affect the imperial change there, or they could come up with their own plans, which would be unique in this world. You're effectively giving them a world setting and giving them the abilities that they have based on being these elite warriors from our history, being thrown in this world together and having them go at it. Whether they're elite commanders or actual warriors or whatever, it's entirely up to you how you build it, but you're giving them the tools for it. So let's move on and talk about those ones from 2015. I want to discuss those series. I'm introducing to you, of course, Tokyo Ghoul and Charlotte. Let's start with Charlotte. So Charlotte focuses on a world that's kind of an alternate world where there's this comet that passes by every 75 years, and it effectively showers down these particles that gives very young children superpowers, gives them special abilities that work in unique ways. We focus on Yu, who has been going through life with his own power, which he has the ability to possess others for a limited period of time. He's effectively used this to get himself where he wants to in life and effectively kind of cheat his way through. He is confronted by his girl who has the power to make herself invisible to one person at a time. So it's kind of a unique take on a power of invisibility. You can choose one person to be visible to, and she basically takes him to another school where he becomes a member of the student council there with her as the student council president, where they actually have this mission of going around and protecting those that have powers. They find them, sort of either recruit them to the school or recruit them under their guide, and the effective is they're trying to keep them, like organizations, from using them or from them themselves abusing their powers, kind of keeping them in a kind of good check. Now, I'd call this one a comedy drama. There's some very great comedic points to it, but there's also very great dramatic points to it that occur throughout the series. They have to deal with not only their personal problems and things that have happened in the past, but they're kind of silly things going on, which are attempt to make it very lighthearted and kind of go against it. So it's an interesting mix of the two that occurs. It's, of course, the supernatural. They have superpowers. They have, like, unusual abilities. One of them effectively, like, goes invisible. The other, well, it's only to one person, but it's invisible. The other one can temporarily possess people. It's a very unusual and interesting kind of way of looking at supernatural powers, that they have their limits in them, too. It's also a school. It's based around them being part of this student council and being a member of school, so it kind of focuses around them going to school very much so. Now, I only rate this one a 3. There are some parts of the drama which really kind of turned me off and had me finish the series a lot later than I would have wanted to, but it does have a pretty decent ending, so I would recommend it. So though, yes, it gets very kind of dark towards the middle point of it with the drama, but they do see the light at the end, so I would recommend finishing it out. But that's the only reason that I rate it so low, because it had that kind of low point for me. Now, if you're using it in a BESM game, I recommend 250 points. Of course, they're going to be members of the student council that works together, each of them having their own superpower or special power, that they're then going to look for other people with powers and either try to help them out if they've got some kind of problem going on themselves, or try to protect them from whatever organizations which may threaten them, possibly recruit them to the student council. You might not need, or to be used by the student council as an assistant of some type. It is up to you how you want to break down the storyline, if you want to keep with some of the storylines from the actual anime or come up with something on your own. I would probably recommend something on your own rather than following the storyline of the anime pretty exactly, just because it's very unique in the way they look at things, and a lot of the powers that they use are unique to the anime, and your players might not have them. Again, you could leave it open that it could occur, but it's up to you. Now let's talk about Tokyo Ghoul. Tokyo Ghoul is set in an alternate world where there's these creatures called ghouls that exist within it. Ghouls are like people, except they have the craving and can only feed upon the flesh of humans, so they need humans to eat them effectively to survive, whether alive or dead. Of course, this means that they're sort of the outliers of humanity and are pushed to the edge, and people kind of hate them. Authorities always go after them. Granted, they have exceptional enhanced senses, speed, and strength in comparison to a human, but that doesn't mean anything when you have low numbers, and effectively most of the time they're on their own. Our series focuses around Ken, who is a college student who gets attacked by a ghoul. In the process of it, the ghoul is actually killed in an accident, and he is injured horribly. He is then taken to the hospital, where they transfer some of the ghoul that was killed's organs into him. They didn't know she was a ghoul. It's pretty hard to tell when they're dead, unless they were using a lot of their abilities, and she wasn't at the time. So effectively, he gets a lot of these organs, and he becomes a half-ghoul, which apparently do exist. There are other ways of getting half-ghouls, but this is one of them, organ transplants. So he's then thrown into this world where he has to deal with the fact that he's effectively a lot like a ghoul then, and has a lot of the hungers and stuff, and has a lot of the problems that they have when it comes to surviving in the world. And he's thrown into a lot of their conflicts that are going on, and the conflicts between those that would hunt them, and the organizations that would protect ghouls, but at what cost, kind of with the violent and more dangerous one. Now, I call this one a dark fantasy. It has, you know, there are these ghoul creatures with their strange and unusual powers that kind of, though, have to feed upon humanity. It makes for very dark. I would also call it a little bit of a horror. They have to eat people, and they have to deal with, like, that Ken has to deal with this fact, and it's kind of horrible and kind of got that, you know, dark connotations that just saying dark fantasy don't really hit on. And I also call it a drama. A lot of bad things happen for these ghouls. Some of them just try to live their lives decently, trying to hide in amongst humanity as best they can without causing a lot of damage to it. And they still go through a lot of bad things that happen to them because people hate them so much, because they do have to eat people in order to survive. So it is this kind of really bad drama going on the side too. Now, I have your characters 500 points. Make them a group of ghouls or half-ghouls, and they might be some NPCs in their group, but effectively they're just trying to live their lives. They're probably not ones that are really hunting humanity, looking for ways of getting flesh, probably things from like people that have just died, things like that they can get their supplies without having to really hurt humanity, that are trying to hide in plain sight and exist in their world without a lot of threats to their safety. But they have to deal with the hunters, which are constantly trying to look for them and attack them and do damage to them. And they also have to deal with the ghoul organizations, which might have the right idea for protecting and helping ghouls, but going about it in a bad way. Or going about it at the cost of humanity, which a lot of these ghouls in your group are going to be wanting to sort of keep this level that they are at least like humans, that they can call themselves, you know, that they have a humanity to them that they want to keep. So they're trying to keep themselves in a reasonable place while dealing with these other factions, basically warring over them, and possibly the threat of each of them dealing with them. Interesting juxtaposition of the story. So that's it for today. I introduced you 4 new anime that I talked about. 2, of course, from this current season, 2 from last year's seasons, all of which would be great to use in a BESM game, and I would highly recommend them. I would also recommend watching them, of course. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you were saying, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to your support for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link to the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.